Welcome to Humanity Rising. I'm Tom Eddington. Jim Garrison is away this week. Delighted to have you with us today for day 3 on our week-long series on forgiveness. It's been an extraordinary week, and the feedback we've been getting from folks who were able to join us on Monday and Tuesday. Clearly, this topic is striking a place in people's hearts. We have been receiving just fantastic feedback on the topic and the conversation. For those of you who weren't able to join us on Monday and Tuesday, Monday we had a wonderful discussion on forgiveness and what is forgiveness and where does it come from in the body of work. Yesterday we focused on the neuroscience and the science of forgiveness. And delighted to continue our journey this week as we focus today on some of the practical applications of forgiveness, where the work is taking place, where it's happening, and two of the extraordinary leaders in the field of forgiveness are with us today to talk about their body of work. And delighted to have my good friend and colleague Eileen Barker with us again today. Welcome, Eileen. Glad to be on this week-long series and journey of forgiveness with you.
Thank you, Tom. I'm delighted too, and I'm excited to have the two speakers we have today, who are both dear friends and colleagues of mine, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion. I think we called this, well, the whole week is Forgiveness in Action, and this today is about bridging the divisions of our time, which are, of course, both global, political, personal, and every level, those divisions, and looking at how forgiveness can help us bridge.
But speaking of the topic, forgiveness in action, I asked you on Monday, and I'm wondering if we can, particularly for the audience who weren't with us on Monday or Tuesday, if you could just share a bit more about your background and where you put forgiveness in action, and just talk about your work and why you and I are doing this week together.
Okay, thank you. Well, for about 20 years, I have really brought a focus of forgiveness into my work in conflict resolution, which I think of as it's a way to heal conflict. And so I'm writing a book now about healing conflict, which I'm excited about, sharing everything I've learned and distilling that. But what's already available for people is that I lead retreats, and I think we posted links in the chat. Maybe I'll do that again. Um, Retreats, and I coach people individually, and I do a lot of trainings for lawyers, mediators, peacemakers, and others. And there's a very special program which Marquita has been part of, um, which is called the Forgiveness Coaching Program. And that's a place where we train people who want to include this work in what they're doing, whether it's to be a forgiveness teacher or a coach, or what a lot of people do is integrate it into their work as a mediator, or other things that they're doing, teaching, healing. We've had therapists, all kinds of different people. And so that's very exciting. And those are the main things that come to mind. You know, we do have a retreat coming up in November. It's online. And I guess I should add that both the training program and the retreat are online, and people have taken these from literally all over the world, all over the US and across the world. We've had people from India, Japan, lots of people from Europe, and that's really exciting. This is a global movement.
Well, it's a very important movement, and one of the things we've been trying to dispel this week is that forgiveness is for other, and it's just really important that our audience understand that yes, others can benefit and will benefit from forgiveness, but it's also very much a gift for ourselves. And I'm looking forward to delving deeper into that today with Ken and Marquita, and want to welcome them into our program. Ken, Marquita, please join us.
Thank you.
So Ken, I'd love to have you, as Marquita is trying to get her technology to work. I'd love for you to just share with us a bit of your background and the work you've been doing over the last 4 decades.
Great. Well, I have, let's see, perhaps I should begin even earlier than that. I began working with issues of revenge and forgiveness and peacemaking in the 1960s. I worked in the South in the civil rights movement, and in the North, I was in the student movement and the anti-war or peace movement at that time, and learned a number of very useful things. But it wasn't until I became a mediator about almost 45 years ago that I began thinking really seriously about how to end conflicts, how to heal from them, as Eileen has suggested. And that led me into issues of forgiveness. I wrote a book. My first book was called Mediation, Revenge, and the Magic of Forgiveness. And my latest book, which is by my count number 20, is called The Magic in Mediation. And it's about how it is that people who are completely and totally stuck figure out how to become unstuck, and unstuck on multiple levels. And one of those levels is the level in which we hold on to the memory of what happened to us. And for me, that's a big part of what forgiveness addresses.
Yeah, thank you, and look forward to diving into that more. And I can say from my own personal experience, and we talked about it on Monday, that it's rewriting that story.
Yes.
That is so powerful and so liberating for each of us. Welcome,
Yes,
Marquita.
absolutely.
Thank
Great.
you. Good morning.
Great to
Good
have you
morning,
with us.
Marquita.
Good morning. Hello, Ken. How are you? Good to
Hi,
see you.
good to see you
Wonderful to see
again.
you. Yes, yes. Ken and I, Ken was my instructor twice. So it's good to see you. It's good to be here. Yes.
Marquita, if you could, similar to what Ken just did, if you could share just a little bit about your work and what brings you with us today.
Well, actually, for me, my journey started. It started back as kind of as a curiosity, and so for as long as I can remember, with all the various tragedies that people experience, I've always been intrigued by how some people not only persevere, but they're able to transform their pain into purpose, right? And so you'll see that, and we have so many instances of that. You have Candace Lightner, who did the Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and after the loss of her daughter. But see, what people may not know is that she had 3 children, and each one of her children were impacted by an impaired driver, and I think it was her son that's still permanently impaired. And then you see like Rachel's Challenge, the foundation in the memory of Rachel Scott, who was the first victim in the Columbine High School. And it was like, how does that happen? How are they able to transform that situation into something not only functional, but something that is healing and productive for others? And then again, periodically we would hear about the family of a victim in court asking for leniency for the guilty party at their sentencing. And so that was my how again. That was my curiosity. But I tell you, when the Amish community supported and embraced the person who shot the 10 children in the classroom, even before they knew the fate of their children, it sparked like an unprecedented worldwide social discourse was sparked. And on the role and power of forgiveness, I was in, right? And little did I know that my curiosity to understand how one person's tragedy would become the catalyst to create change and transformation, and ultimately peace would become my calling. So for me, I ended up so my journey started, right? And so I ended up I was working on my graduate work at Pepperdine School of Law, the Straus Institute, and I took a class by Professor Peter Robinson, who some of you may know, I'm sure, on apology, forgiveness, and reconciliation. And after that, I taught my first class in forgiveness, and I think it was like 2012. And ultimately, that class and that process led me to Eileen, and we've been on that journey ever since. I think it was in 2021, I believe. I actually taught. I think it was 2021 when I was part of time's going so fast now. When I was part of when I became a forgiveness coach. And ultimately, I have to say, in all honesty, the way I look at it is forgiveness and now dignity found me. They answered my how, and my passion became how to. And so at this point, I'm just dedicated to, it's just led my work to be really formed and dedicated to closing that gap at the crossroads of choice, right? And I've had the distinct privilege of being able to witness transformative changes in workshops and with my clients over in all aspects of my practice. So that's me.
Yeah, thank you both for certainly being with us, but also sharing the work that you've been doing for a number of decades now. And I'd love the three of you to just bring this home and share. We've all heard about some iconic leaders who have demonstrated forgiveness, whether it's Nelson Mandela or others. But I'd love for the three of you to just share some personal experiences, some of those moments that you've seen or witnessed or facilitated personal and major transformation, and just share some stories that really moved you and helped reinforce why you do this work.
Well, I'll tell you, if you don't mind me just jump, that just resonated with me so deeply at that point. I still think one of the most recent and most profound transformations that I was able to witness was actually during one of Eileen's, I think it was her last retreat. I serve as a coach for her programs, and I think I've been doing that for about 3 years. I think it's about 3 years now. But we had an 83-year-old woman who had mothered, at 83, this was still a mother-daughter issue. The mother had been deceased for over 30 years. But the daughter was still holding on to things that happened when she was a child. And so for me, that was extremely powerful to witness her make that transformation and once and for all release all of the things that she was hanging on to. I mean, it was, I've seen people do this in other situations, right? In one-on-one, but an 83-year-old woman was finally able to find that peace and solace. And she came back and she said, "Oh, honey, I'm just through with that. I'm over it. Oh, baby, it's over. And I'm not mad at my son either." So I think that was one of the most recently profound ones that I was able to see, because when you're able to release one situation, it unlocks the possibilities. It unlocks almost everything. And so it was just phenomenal to be a part of that process with her.
How about for you, Ken?
There are so many. Let me start with an idea. There are very, very large forgivenesses, and there are teeny tiny ones. And I think every one of us every day has some very teeny tiny things we let go of. And forgiveness fundamentally is letting go of our attachment to whatever it is that has happened to us. My definition of forgiveness is that it is releasing ourselves from the burden of our own false expectations. And I think that we can look at, again, the teeny tiny ones, but the big ones are the ones that really grab us. Here's one for me. I was mediating a juvenile victim offender conflict in which a woman had been driving on a freeway, and all of a sudden, without any warning, her window shattered into 1,000 pieces, and she almost crashed into the driver in front of her. She called the police, and the police came to the scene, and they discovered two kids on a freeway overpass with a BB gun. And so they arrested the kids. One of them was, I think, 11, and the other was 9. They were brothers. Um, and were going to charge them, but then they thought they hadn't had any previous run-ins with the police, and they felt that this might be appropriate for mediation. So it was referred to mediation. So the woman comes into the mediation session, and I ask her to say and to tell these 2 children, who incidentally, we wanted their parents to be there. The father was long gone. The mother was working 2 jobs. So the grandmother was there with the 2 kids. She was in her late 80s and having a lot of difficulty just kind of making it to this session. So I asked the woman to tell them what happened to her. And she turned to these kids and she pointed to them directly and just got right in their face and said, "You little sons of bitches, you almost killed me." And they were just shocked by the power and the violence of what she was saying. And they started to cry. And when they started to cry, she looked at them and realized, these are children. What am I doing? And when she had yelled at them in this way, they realized she wasn't just some unknown person who they could, sort of mess with her life and have no consequences. This is a real human being. And in that moment, things began to shift. But she was still reluctant to, sort of participate fully in this act of trying to resolve the conflict that had occurred. And so we asked her what she wanted, and she said, "Well, I want restitution. I want to have them pay for my windshield." Now, these are 2 kids who are, not even hardly in junior high school yet. They don't have any money. The mother's working 2 jobs. The father's long gone. The grandmother has no money. They're barely squeezing by. They can't pay for her windshield. So we said, "Well, what else could they do? They can't pay for your windshield." And she said, "Well, I don't really like the idea of this, but they could come over to my house maybe once a week for a couple of months and wash my car." And we asked them, "Are you willing to do that?" They said yes. So now we go to her house to make sure that this is all okay, because she's not sure about having, these kids who practically ruined her life come to her home. And so they're out there washing her car. And if you can imagine what that is, they're like washing away their sin. And they're into it completely. And it all works out very well. So they come back the next week, but it's very hot outside. And so she brings milk and cookies to the kids after they've washed her car. And then this becomes a ritual. Every week they come, they wash her car, they get milk and cookies. And then after the 2 months are over, she's been thinking about this and she enjoys this. And so she decides to hire them. She's an elderly woman. She decides to hire them to help mow her lawn and take out the garbage and do little chores around the house. And so they do this for a couple of years. Several years pass. The oldest kid decides to go to college. Guess who pays his tuition? And now imagine what would have happened to these kids if they'd gone through criminal court. And this wasn't a large kind of cataclysmic event. It happened by degrees. But what happened was they became human to each other. And fundamentally, this is what it is really about. There's also a wonderful definition of forgiveness from Annie Lamont, who says that forgiveness is giving up all hopes of having a better past. And I think that this is a part of it. It is returning to the human. It is no longer having this giant who has disrupted your life, but now returning to a human scale. There are many other stories, but I think that's a
good
solid
one.
one.
Well, you have us all in tears.
Good, good.
Many of us. You've done your job.
Perfect response.
Your work is done.
Yeah.
How about you, Eileen? Any particular story that you'd like to share?
There is one I was reminded of when Marquita was sharing. This is sort of my favorite thing that happens, and it's happened. What I'm going to tell you one, but this has happened many times, and it's probably what I love most about forgiveness is what this demonstrates. And I can't even explain it, but you'll kind of know when I tell you this. I mean, okay, so this is a situation where, let me see, I'm going to pick one of these. A woman came to one of my very first trainings I did on forgiveness, very first retreats. And one of the first things, I suppose we went around, I can't really remember exactly how this worked, but I learned from her. She told me, or she might have shared with the room, that she was really, really angry with her sister, really angry, and that they hadn't spoken to each other for 10 years. And she was really angry. Well, one of the first things we do in the training is we do work that Fred Luskin talked about on Monday, which is we look at people look at their story and we deconstruct the story. And one of the things we look at is, how we've created sort of a blame narrative. And something really shifted for her around that. And afterward, she shared, after we did that piece of work, she said, wow, I never had really seen my contribution. She said, but I really see it. And it really shifted things. Her anger was not there anymore. And she was just sort of, all of a sudden seeing things differently. And, that was really good. And we went on a break. And she came back from the break. She was holding a cell phone in her hand. And she was like ashen almost. And she said, I just can't believe what happened. She said, I just got a text message from my sister.
Mm, wow.
That power or magic, if you will, of forgiveness it's so incredible and it's so beautiful. I think it speaks to the energetic of our connection, that somehow when we lay down our weapons and our sword and our anger, it just shifts things in some way. The other person feels it. And I mean, these are just me trying to put words to something that I really don't know, but then there's some space for then the other person where before they were encountering some energetic brick wall and now it's not there, and they feel, oh, there's a space here, and they step into it. And that blows me away.
Yeah,
I love that.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Well,
Have you
thank
encountered this? Yeah, as well, Ken? You've
Sorry,
seen you've seen this happen?
I've seen it happen many times. My belief is, this is a little weird, but there's an idea in quantum mechanics, and the idea is entanglement. And entanglement is the direct, non-local connection between particles that may have spin up or spin down or different types of features of elementary particles, but they are connected across the universe at a speed faster than the speed of light, which means that it has something to do with the nature of energy in space. And we're not sure exactly what it is. There's a theory that says that it's a kind of wormhole in space that exists, but I think that it also exists on a human level, that we are connected with each other energetically. And if emotions are waves, then there's a kind of waveform that corresponds to anger and hatred, and another one that corresponds to fear, another one that corresponds to sadness. And when that shifts, it shifts not only in us, but those we are connected to. So to me, your story is very beautiful and, clarifies something I think that exists for all of us. We are all interconnected. And when one of us shifts, it shifts things for all of us. And that's the great hope for peacemaking. I call this the mediation butterfly effect.
Yeah, thank you for articulating that because it's just magical when that happens.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Beyond the energetic, the shared consciousness, I'm wondering if each of you, in your observations of having done this work for years, what's your sense of, and what have you observed is going on in the skull brain, going on in the heart, going on in the storytelling of people as they find forgiveness? And I'd love to hear from each of you what's the process that causes that transformation to happen?
Well, I can jump in at the beginning if you like, and then Marquita can jump in with her observations, and Eileen. I think of it as the unraveling of a knot. I think that our energy gets tangled up, and it forms a kind of a knot that prevents the free flow of energy within us. And conflict creates that knot, but we become accustomed to that knot. It gives us things that we can use to justify what we've done to others, to avoid looking at the harm that we have caused. And so I think in a way of forgiveness and of conflict resolution generally is a kind of waste removal process, getting rid of all of the stuff that prevents the free flow of energy within and between and around us. And so I think we have to think about those as three locations that where conflicts take place: inside of us, internally, relationally, and between us, and systemically and around us. And that energy forms systems, that is, patterns, and those patterns have a continuity to them. So what needs to happen is that we need to do various things that return people to a sense of their own natural free flow of energy without having that energy blocked, because blocking it stops us from living our lives. So what's at stake is your life.
Very powerful. Marquita.
That is very powerful. So, when Ken says these kinds of things, you have to sit in that space for just a moment just to take that all in. But I think one of the things that that comes to my mind, you may be familiar with Father Michael Lapsley, and he was a South African priest that lost both of his hands and one of his eyes when he received a letter bomb. Because he was an advocate for, he was advocating for human rights. And I remember sitting in a workshop where it was just so powerful to me because at the time, I think it was like back in 2012 maybe, and he walks into the room and he has the prosthetic, he still has the metal prosthetic hooks. And when he walked into the room, before he even uttered a word, here's what I knew. I knew what was possible. I knew forgiveness because he was going to teach us a workshop called Healing of Memories. He didn't even have to open his mouth. And it was like, it was not only was forgiveness possible, but it was a choice. It was very clear at that point. And I think when you can get to that point where you can understand that it is a choice, it's an option, that it's a possibility. Because sometimes people don't even know that it's even possible to forgive something. He has a quote that says, if something happens to you, then you're a victim. He says, if you survive it, you're a survivor. He says, but sometimes people get stuck. They become prisoners in the moment in history, become prisoners to that moment, right? And you just can't see beyond that. You can't see that there is another path for you. You have to sometimes ask yourself, what else could this mean? That's one of my favorite questions. What else could this mean? What is this possible? What's possible here? And then also, I think when the people get caught up, it's like, what am I making that mean about me? What am I making that mean about me? What's it saying about me, right? And I think when they're able to kind of take that step back and examine. One of my other favorite quotes is with Viktor Frankl. Ken, as you can see, I'm quoting like you. It's Viktor Frankl, and he talks about between stillness and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to make a choice. And that's in our choice is where our growth and freedom lies. And if we can just sit in that space between stimulus and response and take a look at what and examine, ask another question. What is going on? What is really happening here? Because absence of the facts, we create our own stories, right? And so and sometimes people get so caught up in their dynamic, in their story, that they don't, it's like, don't interrupt the argument with the facts, please, And so I find that if we can kind of get them to slow down, if we can sit in that space between stillness and response, just pause for a moment and take a beat and ask the next question, what else could this mean? I find that that's kind of where people just sit back and they go, oh, okay. Sometimes that's where a shift occurs. As Eileen was talking about, that energy that shifts. That's, for me, that's what we live for. That's what I live for, that shift. And sometimes you don't exactly know what you just said to make that shift happen. It's like something just happens, right? And they go, oh, and I've had people ask me, what did you say? I say, oh no, in that moment, I'm not exactly sure. But for that person, I think it's partially the process too. I think it's a process, right? It's a step-by-step process. It's like first you have to, as we talked about earlier, you deconstruct your story. You take a look at this, you kind of go through each step. And for some people, the shift happens when they can get clarity about the definition of what forgiveness is. Because sometimes that's where people get stuck, in their definition of what they believe forgiveness is. Because if you believe forgiveness means that I have to let them off the hook or whatever it is, and that there's no justice and this and that, then you're going to get stuck. But if you're able to take a look at maybe even in your definition of what forgiveness is to you, right? Then sometimes if they can just understand that forgiveness, it frees them, right? Forgiveness is for them. It lets them off the hook. Once they get that concept, then the shift happens. So it's just, there's a multitude of different ways that shift occurs, and people kind of unravel with that. When I was getting ready I do a workshop with two other colleagues, and we were brainstorming about how to, just about different topics and different things. And we came up with this little topic that says breaking news. Angst and turmoil have just escaped from a maximum security prison, and forgiveness was the key, right? So it's like, so I think just that in and of itself, it helps people to kind of make their shift.
And thank you, Marquita. That was beautiful.
I love that. I love that. Yeah. They've escaped the prison and forgiveness was the key. It reminds me of something, Ken, that you often say, or at least I've heard you say it for a long time, and it's meant a lot to me. It's that you say every conflict teaches us what we most need to learn. Yeah, that sentence has been stayed with me now for decades. Yeah, it's I find it to be 100% true. And I find it to be true on an individual personal level, and also when we look at societal divides and global conflicts, I see it as true there too. Yeah.
Yeah. If we think about it from the point of view of kind of conflicts in general, we can think about it, for example, with babies. When babies are born, they engage in what is called parallel play, and they have no conflicts with one another. But then they graduate to cooperative play, and they begin to experience conflicts because one baby may, sort of decide that they want to play with the toy that the other baby is playing with. And so the conflicts that they experience are experienced in the transition from parallel play to cooperative play because they are learning a new set of skills. And so this allows us to see that every conflict takes place at a crossroads that's defined on the one hand by a problem that we are now required to solve, and on the other hand by the fact that we do not yet have the skills we need to solve it. And if that's the case, is potentially true for every conflict. That is, it may even be that we seek out the conflicts we need in order to be able to grow in the ways that we need to be able to grow in order to have the kind of lives that we want for ourselves. I have another way of explaining it, which is that there are two groups of people who do not experience conflicts. One, there are no 2-year-olds who experience conflicts over romantic love because they're not ready yet. And number two, there are no 60-year-olds, we hope, who experience conflicts over curfew with their parents because they've already figured out how to solve that problem. So the conflicts that we get take place in between the period when we are growing and learning and discovering new things and required now to solve new problems as teenagers and parents discover as their relationship moves towards the dissolution of the family system that they have created over a period of decades, and then graduates to some new kind of relationship. And I think what forgiveness is in part is releasing ourselves from a lower stage of organization and freeing us to work at a higher level of skill. And when we do that, the conflicts we had at a lower level aren't necessarily resolved, they're outgrown. So I think of there being two things. One is transformation, and the other is transcendence. The transformation is a change in the form of the conflict. We now see it in a different way. Transcendence is outgrowing the conflict. And we do that by learning what the conflict took place in order to teach us.
I love that. I love it. And every time I hear you explain it, I learn something new from it.
Oh, good.
So beautiful. And it reminds me, somebody mentioned this on Monday, that Colin Tipping's work was about radical forgiveness. And it was about, what if we created these scenarios so that we could learn? He posits that, and it's a powerful way to look at it, that, we created, just as you said, maybe we even on some level created this so that we could grow. But whether or not we did, it's certainly that opportunity to grow. And yeah, that's really powerful. Again, I think that I see it all the time on a very personal level or interpersonal level. But I think it's true when I think about, the political divide in the US or what's happening. These are opportunities for people to grow. And the fact that we, keep like stewing on the same issues for centuries doesn't change that. I think it's been going on for hundreds of years, therefore it's just kind of a fact. No, it's just taking us a while to learn this one. And the things that are inherently, that are being learned are really very, in some ways, they're very basic things about caring about one another and respecting one another and including, they're very fundamental things for us to learn as a species.
Yeah.
And very challenging, obviously.
Yeah. Well, this is part of what I was hoping that we would get around to today, to talking about, which is we think of forgiveness as being something that is individual, personal, altruistic, noble, specific, maybe even local. but forgiveness can also be collective, social, political, generic, global, and immensely practical. And the question is really, what would it mean to think about forgiveness at a political and social and economic level? What would it mean to imagine those conflicts as being forgivable? And the difficulty is that there's a danger of um, uh, sort of giving permission for uh, uh, political acts to take place that are actually quite destructive. And so the difficulty is really on multiple scales. One is trying to figure out how to scale up what we've learned at an individual level and seeing how that might be applied at a mid-scale to communities, to schools, to workplaces, to teams, and then how that might be scaled up again to larger conflicts like those taking place in the Middle East, in Ukraine, in Sudan, etc. And what would forgiveness look like? And we have one model for that, which is quite a beautiful model, which is the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions created in South Africa, in part by Archbishop Desmond Tutu and others. But we also have the model of restorative justice circles. We have the model of dialogue, facilitated dialogues that draw people into this process. We have consensus building. We have mediated collaborative negotiation. We have large group problem solving technologies of various types. We have what is really more important, a set of ideas flowing out of what is called conflict resolution systems design, which enables us to look at systems and create design really mechanisms whereby people who get into trouble with one another are brought back into problem solving and negotiation. So there are loopbacks into negotiation and to other sorts of forgiveness processes that I've seen take place on a large scale. And those, especially in facilitated dialogues, which I've done quite a number of, those are very powerful. And in communities with restorative justice.
Mhm.
And maybe picking up on that, and I'd love to get the three of you to respond to. So we saw the tobacco industry perfect the way that they've manufactured cigarettes to ensure that they became addictive, and then worked the whole legal system and the political system, knowingly what they were doing was killing people. And that model was picked up by so many other industries, certainly picked up by Monsanto with their glyphosate Roundup product. And the social media companies have done the same thing. And we saw the oil and gas industry in the 1970s do the same thing, where they knew what they were doing was killing people, killing the earth, destroying our ability to live, and yet pursued for their own personal or business interest, making money. And I haven't seen, beyond what they were legally required to do, I haven't seen companies take that next step of asking for forgiveness and working in some of the ways that you're speaking to, Ken. And I'm wondering what the three of you think about the role that forgiveness could play where there's intentional harm that's being done.
Well, I would love to hear from you, Ken, on that. I guess I'll share one thought about it, which is, can we forgive people who do things like that? Of course we can, but it's possible to do it. If I were, and I'm not, but honestly, but if those things were really eating at me, and I was very angry and distressed about it, then I think it would be in my best interest to work on forgiveness. When in my workbook, forgiveness workbook that I put together a long time ago and use, the very first step is we call it a forgiveness inventory, to think about who you need to forgive. And we go through the cast of characters, family members, friends, colleagues, but corporations, government, there's also entities we need to forgive sometimes. But what really came to me first is that I wouldn't really think about, I would really like, I think in what you're saying, I think more about what would it take for businesses. And I think this is, Tom, your work is in conscious leadership, your expertise. So really bringing about, conscience and consciousness in business, in big business. I think that's, to me, what the real need is here, is that awakening. Like, wait a minute, is money real? Is it really just about money here? Are there other important interests that we need to be caring about?
If I can jump in here for just for a second before we do that, one of the things that comes to my mind at this point is also some of the work that I've been doing in dignity. Kenny talked about all these various models, and one of the other models that has been eminently foundational to me is the dignity model from Dr. Donna Hicks, and she is at the and I'm sure you're not Dr. Hicks at the at Harvard, and she's done some phenomenal work in that area. And so I think if we get back down to the fundamentals, right? We get back down to the concept of dignity. We get back down to the concept of that we all human beings, and you talk about being connected. We're all connected, and we all have this human need, and it's our humanity, right? And so what exactly is dignity? Dignity is your birthright. Dignity is the fact that you are priceless and invaluable. And if we can get back down to that concept, but fundamentally, but it's like, all human beings are not only are they priceless, but they're irreplaceable, right? And so if we get back into our shared humanity and with you have a shared humanity, we have a certain amount of responsibility and accountability to each other, and to see each other as that. And I think so. I don't know that we can have this conversation without talking about that part of it fundamentally, so that you could kind of look at. So what is our expectation, and what is the corporation's responsibility to that? If we look at each other, even in our own personal conflicts, and remember that each one of us has the right to be here, has the right to a good life, the right to be healthy, the right to just to be part of our human family. Desmond Tutu calls us precious members of the family of Earth, and I love that. So I think fundamentally, if that's where we could start, then everything else goes from there.
Very nice, Marquita. Thank you. I think that there's a fundamental question here that we need to address. The difficulty with forgiveness of corporations, of political leaders, of social sort of discrimination and prejudice in all of these areas is that there's a very fine line between forgiveness and giving permission to people to continue engaging in destructive behaviors. Condonation. And what we are talking about here is not condemnation. And the secret for me in understanding forgiveness came from Roger Fisher and William Urey's book, Getting to Yes, where their very first suggestion in relation to collaborative negotiation is, one, separate the person from the problem. Be soft on the person and hard on the problem. So we are not talking about forgiving the problem. We're talking about forgiving the person. And then the question becomes, well, it's quite obvious, first of all, that if you don't forgive the person, you will create defensiveness and counter-reaction in the person. If you forgive the problem, you are basically giving permission for it to happen over and over and over again and for more damage to continue. So the trick, I think, is to do those two things simultaneously. And that's part of what makes forgiveness difficult. It's a complex act. It requires two fundamental movements that take place at the same time. And so the question is, if we look, for example, at politics, how does politics operate? And the answer is it's a zero-sum game based on power in which one side wins, and that means the other side necessarily loses. So we are given a choice in every election, this candidate or that candidate, this party or that party, this policy or that policy. And we are presented with a binary choice rather than an analog one. And there's not much opportunity really to discuss what any of this means in any, kind of major way. And this is now shifting in a number of countries around the world where people are beginning to look at the nature of political decision making and trying to put that on a more substantively democratic footing. So I wrote this book called Politics, Dialogue, and the Evolution of Democracy, in which I tried to come up with an interest-based definition of politics that is not a power-based one, not a rights-based one, but one that is based on the satisfaction of interests. And I came up with three alternative definitions of politics. One, politics is a social problem-solving process. That's all it is. It's just social problem-solving process. What that means is that we have to forgive people enough to invite them into that problem-solving process. And we have to not forgive the problems in order to be able to put them out there for all of us to be able to address. Number two, politics is a large group, multi-stakeholder decision-making process. But as mediators, we have experience with large group, multi-stakeholder decision-making processes. We can structure those in a way that don't create the animosity and the hostility and the hatred that we then later have to forgive. So in other words, we are taking a preventative approach to forgiveness by preventing people from getting to a state where there's anything even to forgive. And the basic methodology for that is conversation. Constructive, creative, caring conversation. And the last definition is that politics is a conflict resolution process. And if it's a conflict resolution process, how about bringing in conflict resolvers, people who are experienced in doing this, to help create conversations that draw us into trying to fix the problem rather than trying to destroy the opponent. And that's the difficulty. And if you just look at the debate last night between the vice presidential candidates, all debates, all political debates, are designed with the idea of trying to destroy the other person. And that means that no matter who wins in November, half the country hates them. And that's no way of solving problems. So what we have to figure out how to do is not surrender our principles, not surrender our values, not surrender the things that we believe in, but instead not personalize them so that we treat the person we disagree with as dispensable, as able to be eliminated and defeated, destroyed, humiliated. The dignity that Marquita talked about is absolutely undermined through the political process. the dignity of all of these people. And you have to develop a seriously tough skin in order to participate in this. And of course, that doesn't make you a very good listener. So we've actually destroyed the political process through the kind of conflicts that we are having with one another. And the difficulty is, I can see in one of the chats that vice presidential debate was criticized as too friendly. That we want a bloody match. We want people to kind of really beat each other up, and then we choose the victor. Well, this is trial by combat. This is true in the Middle Ages, but we hopefully are capable of evolving beyond this. What we need is not defeat and victory. What we need is for all of us to join together in trying to solve the problem. And rarely, every once in a while, we are able to do that, but it is possible for us to do it far more frequently.
I found that interesting too, that the two who were debating seemed to actually find common ground in a lot of areas. And so what they did instead was demonize the people who weren't there. Fairly so.
Yeah,
But that's what they more did that. There was still some demonization of each other, but more that just displaced, but they themselves were rather cordial, found common ground. So that was very interesting. Um, Ken, I know that you have often been called to work with groups of people who are, at odds, to say the least. And I wonder if you would speak to that, how you do that when you have, maybe you can
yeah,
give some examples of that when you go into, maybe it's a group of right-wing people and progressive, whatever, in other countries, other, different groups who have been in conflict.
yeah. I have facilitated dialogues between Israelis and Palestinians, between Sandinistas and Contras, between Ukrainians and Russians, between Greek citizens and immigrants. And in every one of these conversations, um, what fundamentally takes place is that there is a design process in which we try to figure out what are the questions that don't require a winner and a loser. So, with this audience, for example, there are three categories of questions we could ask. One, who's the oldest person on this call? That's me. Who's the youngest? That's Marquita. Who's the tallest? Who's the shortest? And there's a single correct answer to all of those questions. And those single correct answers arrange themselves in a hierarchy. Category of question two, how old are you? How tall are you? And now there's a single correct answer for each person, not for everyone. Category three, which is the interest-based question. What issues are you facing at whatever age you are at? What does your height mean to you? What did it mean to you when you were growing up? And now there are no correct answers for anyone. Or rather, there are many, many correct answers for each person. And those answers are evolving. So the correct answer at one moment is not the correct answer for the next. So what are those questions for groups of people? Here's an example from the point of view of Israelis and Palestinians. Two questions. Question one, what values did you learn as a result of belonging to the group that you belong to? As a Palestinian, as a Jew, what did you learn growing up? What are the core values of your group? And two, how can we apply those values to this conversation we are having right now? And now you have shifted everybody into a fundamentally different form of discourse, a different kind of dialogue. And we're looking for questions like that. And there are thousands of them. But what we want to do is to come up with a question that cannot be answered by demonizing the other side. And in fact, alternatively draws us closer. So, for example, with the Greek citizens and immigrants, and these were multiple dialogues over a period of time. The opening questions were first, for each individual person, have you personally in your life, in a family or neighborhood or school or workplace, ever been the new one? What was that like? How were you treated? And have you ever in a family or school or neighborhood or workplace been the one who's been there for a while and now new people are coming in? And what was that like? And how were you treated? And now everybody can start to imagine what it might feel like to be the new one or to be the one who's coming in. Now we can start the conversation. That's what I think we're looking for.
And just picking up on that and going back to something you said before, Ken, how easy or how hard is it to even get people to agree on what is the problem that's needing to be solved?
Yeah, absolutely. So my way of saying this is we have to mediate our way into the mediation. We have to dialogue our way into the dialogue. And it's not easy because when people have been treated badly for a long time, they find spokespeople who will represent them, lawyers, leaders of various types. And those spokespeople are in part responsible for speaking the unspeakable, for saying what the person who's been treated badly has been unable to say in a convincing way. But that very fact of representing that person means that you can become stuck in the point that you are making and unable to learn any new point, and even unable to hear a response or elicit a response, which is the response that you want from the other side. So here's a simple way of saying it. Virtually every conversation that takes place around this is about us against them, or me against you. So I may say, you are whatever, and attach an insult to it. What is the word you used negatively? What's the form of that? It takes the form of an accusation. And what do you get when you accuse someone of something? Defense and counterattack, always. And that's not going to be a discussion that's going to go anywhere. Instead, we have to figure out how to deal with this. Just very shortly, I'm sorry I'm taking too much time here, but I was asked to consult with a university that was doing work with on racism and prejudice between the students and the faculty. And the faculty was resisting this because they felt they were being accused and they didn't want to participate in it. And so I proposed a question to the faculty, which was, do you feel that you have been stereotyped by students, that you are stereotyped by students? And their answer is absolutely. We don't feel that students understand who we are at all. And the students feel stereotyped by the faculty. Now let's talk about stereotyping. This is something you share. It's not something that just one person experiences. You're all experiencing stereotyping. So what can we learn about this? And now we've got a conversation that can begin.
Yeah, picking up on that point, Marquita, how do you get people to be curious?
How do you get them to be curious?
Yeah.
Great question.
That is a great question. I had to think about that for a second. How do you get people to be curious? I think we go back to the story. We go back to the story that they have created. And so you allow them to tell their story, allow them to share. The part that I like the best is that when we first start the process, we have them, as Elliot talks about, we have them write their story, and we tell them it's a free form. Just write it all out, all the lovely words that may come along with that, all the feelings. just have a free flow, expression of your story. And then after we look at the story, we kind of take a step back, as I talked about a little bit earlier, and just take a step back and just go, well, what else could this mean, right? It's like, what are the possibilities? You start asking them questions about what are the other options? What may have been going on at that point? What was going on for you? What was going on for them? Because you see, I think what happens is that the point where people get wounded is in the point of unmet expectations, right? I think that's where the wounding comes in, right? Excuse me. I think what happens is that we all have labels and expectations. And I think, Fred Luskin talks about the unenforceable rules. And I like to talk about the labels and expectations. If you have a label, if you have you have a label, mother, father, sister, brother, we have this unspoken, unwritten, and oftentimes unshared list of expectations about that relationship, about that person. And you hear it. I hear it all the time. I hear it all the time when it's that my mother did that, or my father did that, or my sister did that, or whatever, right? And so you hear it all the time. And so I think that what happens is I think of it like a mobile, like the label on the top, and then all these lists, a list of what we want hanging off the bottom, right? And I have a client that will say something like, if my sister did this to me, or she did that to me, and she's manipulative, and she's a user, and she is mean-spirited, right? And I say, okay, so your sister, and for some reason it comes in threes. So she's manipulative, she's a user, and she's mean-spirited. And that's your sister. Yes, and every time I try to do this and I try to do that, and she won't budge, and she doesn't change, or what have you. So I said, okay, just for a moment, just for a moment, take the label of sister away from this person. So now what do we have? We have a person that is manipulative, a user, and mean-spirited. Okay, now you have this person. And so the question becomes, now what are your expectations of this person? They go, oh, and so this is a person who was manipulative and became a sister, who was a user and became a sister, who was manipulative and became a sister. Nothing else changed except the label that we've attached to it, right? We have this label that we have attached to it. And so when we run into these, and of course we don't talk about it. We don't say, as my sister, this is my contract. This is what you're supposed to do for me, or this is what I expect from you, right? No, it's not until we run into that wounding. I can't believe she did that, and that was my sister. Okay, so and so that's where I think we start taking a look at that. What were how realistic are your expectations, and what was going on? And so you'll see the situation also where somebody will say, they will say, well, let's say I need a loaf of bread. I go back to the COVID times when we had all these shortages. I need 2 loaves of bread, right? And I'll say, okay, I know where I can go get that from. I go get that from my sister. I can go to this person. I can get these 2 loaves of bread. And you get there, and this person says, I'm sorry, I only have 1. And you go, well, what do you mean you only have 1? You had 2 last week. You gave somebody else 2. Why do you only have 1 when I did? We can go through that thing, or we can just accept the fact, okay, they only have 1. And then here's what they say to you, but you're welcome to it. Now, what just happened? What just happened? What just happened was that they gave you 100% of what they had, right? 100%. So oftentimes when you look at these situations, we have to talk about the capacity. What was that person's capacity, and what were they willing to give? They gave you 100% of what they actually had. And you can either step back and go, wow, that's great. Now, were they responsible to fill your entire need? No, not necessarily. But sometimes we have to give ourselves what we need the most, right? And so we can kind of get them to take a look at the situation and unfurl that just a little bit. It's like, well, did this conflict, did this person either have the capacity, one, or did they give you, and in that capacity, did they give you 100% of what they had available? So those are the places where I like to start with people, to have them take a look at getting curious. And then oftentimes when we get to those places where the capacity and the labels and expectations, it just kind of dissipates, right? They kind of go, well, wait a minute. Now I can interact with you based on my realistic concept of who you are. I don't have to keep wounding myself, because when you keep going in, you're wounding yourself. They're not wounding you anymore. But if you have the awareness, and if you can say, you can say, I see you for who you are. I see the situation. You are this person. I'm not going to keep running into that wall with that same expectation. And if you do, you're wounding yourself. And like Ken talked about a little bit earlier in his definition, I tell people, when we are able to move past that, I say, I release you from the hold of my expectation. I release you from that hold because there is a hold on that expectation, right? And then I come back and I say, and I release us both. I release both of us from that hold of my expectation because I'm no longer tethered to that. And it helps you to kind of now you can have a relationship based on the reality, right? You can have a different expectation, different approach. I think that's kind of where we start talking about. And then once they begin to unravel those kinds of things, then it kind of trickles, right? It trickles down to other areas. It's like, oh, wait a minute, what is the reality of the situation? And what role did I play? And what were my expectations? And how realistic was that? As I said earlier, absence of the facts, we create our own story, right? We kind of fill in the blanks and we kind of make it what it is. But if we can take a moment, take again back to my favorite quote, between stillness and response, there's that space. This is that space. So that's kind of right.
Great.
Good
Great
point.
comment.
Thank you. So I'm wondering, to that space between stimulus or reaction versus response, what is work that each of us can do to create more space between a reaction or a stimulus and a response?
Yeah, I love that space in between and ways of expanding that space. One is by asking what I call difficult and dangerous questions, open-ended questions, really powerful questions. Questions like, for example, one of my favorites is, what question would you most like the other person to ask you right now?
Mm-hmm.
And between two people who are arguing, excuse me, is this conversation working? They'll say no. Would you like it to work? Yes, of course. Why would you like it to work? Tell the other person why you want the conversation to work. And now, what is one thing the other person could do that would make this conversation work better for you? And are you willing to do that? And then the same in reverse. And you can even go a little further and say, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being highest, how would you rank the conversation you were having before you answered that question? And they'll say 0, -2, something like that. How would you rank the conversation we're having right now? 7, 8? Here's the follow-up question. What would it take for you to make it a 10? And what are you waiting for? And now we've got questions that people have to answer with their lives. And those are the deepest and most fundamental and most powerful questions. And we're not even really looking for the answers. We're looking for people to allow these questions into their lives. Those questions create, I think, that kind of space that Marquita is looking at and describing so beautifully.
Yeah, as you were sharing those questions, Ken, I was just thinking about my own life, and any one of those questions would stop me in my tracks.
Yeah, I think that's the goal, to ask a question that stops you in your tracks. Questions that drop you to your knees, questions that take your breath away. And the only way we find those is by being willing to ask the same questions of ourselves. And then looking at what those are and how do we genericize those questions. So one of the questions, for example, with regard to the stories and the narratives that we've all been talking about here is who do you become as a result of the story that you just told?
Mm-hmm.
what kind of person do you end up being? And is that who you want to be? Those are the questions, again, that we recognize because they cut through the normal defenses that we have. In the latest book that I wrote called The Magic in Mediation, there's a chapter on the art of asking questions. And so for people who want more, you can take a look at that. And there are maybe hundreds of questions listed in there, of which these are samples. And I think we've only got the beginning of an understanding of how deep and profound and beautiful this question asking process is.
You know, I love those questions, and I just find that so riveting as well. And what I'm sitting here now thinking about it as a mediator and realizing how truly dangerous it is. They are dangerous questions in a sense, but the thing I wrestle with when I'm in the situation, I'm trying to get to one of those questions is getting past my own judgments.
Yeah,
You can only ask those questions, in my opinion. They can only really go to the place you really want them. If you really are not in any judgment, not
yes,
making anybody wrong, and
yes,
really curious. And then
yes,
that's where the work is for me. Like I have to get really curious. I'm working with somebody now and it's just such a great example because it's a person who's really caught in some very negative spirals, but somehow kind of knows it. He doesn't know how to get out of it, but he understands it enough that he's enlisted my help. And so he'll say things like, "Would you tell them blah, blah, blah?" And I'll say, "No, I won't." But it takes me a while till I can articulate for him why I don't think that's a good idea. I'll just say, "No, I don't think that's going to be helpful." And he'll say, "Okay, whatever." But I have to really do some work to find a way to explain that to him so that it could be a learning experience and valuable. That's been really interesting and growthful for me. But I come back to curiosity. Like I look for it
yeah,
in those moments. And you were talking about that a moment before, a few minutes ago, Tom, and asking about that. And I find that tremendously powerful. I was recently working with somebody. We're working on a mediation, but then something else came up about another situation and another person that he was having a lot of difficulty with, and telling me about all the horrible things this person had done. And we did not actually have a lot of time to go into it. And so, but I thought, oh, he's asking for my help with that, and that's kind of distracting him. So is there anything I could offer? And so this to me was kind of a shortcut. And it was like, well, have you ever been curious about why that person is acting that way? And I might have and it was also to point to, and what do you think it's like for that person who is being so critical? And
beautiful.
like, what do you think it's like for that person? And it really flipped a switch. I could
Yeah,
see it, in the face. And I saw that person actually start what I interpreted as feel sad, because obviously a person who's being mean-spirited and is in pain in my book. My way of thinking is that's probably not a happy place that the person's coming from. And that the person I'm working with kind of tuned into that. Now all of a sudden there's empathy. And I thought, this is interesting. Just that. Let's see where that goes. So I think that's a huge piece of this equation, is to somehow tap into our curiosity, which can lead to empathy. And the other thing, and you asked about this earlier, and I've been thinking about it ever since. To me, Tom, the biggest thing is when you said, how do we get there? It's not through the head. And Marquita's heard me say that a million times, and everybody who works with me has heard me, you can't get there through your head. I know that's hard because we want to figure out everything intellectually, but you can't. Forgiveness is an act of the heart.
yeah,
and possibly the soul too, but the heart and the soul. And I feel like anything we can do to help people drop in to, I also always try to remind myself that we all already have this. I'm not giving it to them. I'm just helping them reconnect to something they've disconnected to in themselves. Fundamentally, it's already there. We're hardwired for it. And many people, like our mutual friend of Tom and Ken, I think you know him too, Michael Nagler, who remembers you from the 60s in Berkeley.
Yeah,
We are hardwired, for peace and nonviolence and compassion and things like that. Many people have noticed that. And Marshall Rosenberg used to talk about that with nonviolent communication. So it's kind of like, like rediscovering that neural pathway. And our guest yesterday talked so much about what if it fires together, it wires together, and that, we have to reacquaint ourselves with those pathways if we've left them, but they're there. So I think all that's really, really important.
very nice. Beautifully said.
As
Thank you.
we're coming up to the end of the show, I would just invite each of you to share any closing thoughts you have about the conversation today. It's been an absolutely extraordinarily beautiful session today. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to jump in here. I'm going to say that, I think that at the end of the day, what we're talking about is the way that we communicate with each other. It's about communication and giving each other the benefit of the doubt and the opportunity to be heard and the opportunity to have these conversations. Because oftentimes when you have a conversation, you actually hear the other side. It's like, oh, I didn't realize that. You get to hear something different and maybe you weren't aware of. And, Dr. Hicks talks about how we have to develop a sensitivity to how other people experience us, especially in conflict resolutions, conflict situations. And sometimes that's hard. It's like, what do you mean the way somebody experiences me? My intentions were great, but we have to understand how it's not so much what we intended. Sometimes it's how they heard it, or how they took it, what was going on. But that's through a conversation, and the more that we can become aware, I think that's really it. I lay on my quote, that between stimulus and response, take a beat, take that pause, become aware, ask the next question. Awareness is key. I think that awareness is the start of healing. Because once you go, now you have some place to start from, once you can kind of sit back into that. So that's really what I think is just critically important for us to kind of take away and remember that, that each one of us are valuable, each one of us are priceless, and we're all here as part of the family of Earth, as Tutu claims. Yeah.
Very nice. For me, I think that there's something really important and difficult and dangerous in the work that we are doing. And I think that forgiveness itself is kind of dangerous because it looks like you're asking people to condone what happened to them. To give permission to people to do the things that are destructive. And I don't think that that's what forgiveness is at all. It's actually, as Eileen was just saying, an act of the heart. It is also a spiritual path, a direct and immediate spiritual path. So there are a series of dangers in forgiveness and in opening these conversations. There's a danger of slipping into revenge. In every conflict, there's a danger of becoming your opponent, condoning evil, slipping into sentimentality and a kind of moral relativism or moral superiority. I forgive you because I'm better than you. It's possible to kid ourselves about forgiveness and to think that we've done it and to play a game of kind of one-upsmanship so that we look more righteous than the other person. And it's possible to forgive people superficially in a way that makes you allows you to remain in denial. And I think the deepest there are two still deeper dangers I think we need to address. One is the danger of never forgiving yourself, of focusing on the other person. But for every failure of forgiveness with others, there is some internal failure to forgive ourselves. And for me, this is often the key to getting to a place of forgiveness. And this draws me back to what Eileen was saying before about the difficulties of doing this. And what it reminds me of is a kind of thought about that I've had before about, sort of who am I to do this work? What gives me the permission to, sort of play God in people's lives? And so one question is, who are you? Who do you think you are to be able to try and do this work? But the second question is, who are you not to? If you have some basic idea or perception that could help some other person get untrapped from the things that are holding them back in their lives, who are you to withhold that? So the difficulty in forgiveness is also the danger in it is giving up on people too soon and condemning them to remain stuck for the rest of their lives. And so I think that those other dangers are, kind of more serious, and that there's a kind of basic approach that I think we have to this in my experience. One is no pressure at all in terms of actually forgiving. This is a choice people have to make for themselves, and it is not ours to force them into a place where they feel like they have to let go of something in their lives that's given their lives meaning. And here we have to address another difficulty and danger, which is how do we work with people who are actually victims without reinforcing their victimhood? And this is tricky and difficult, but we are not off the hook for what we have contributed to this relationship of animosity. So, somebody is a bully. We have to look at what it is that they're doing that is bullying, but we also have to look at what it is inside of us that makes it difficult for us to respond to this in a constructive and creative and dignified, to use Marquita's term, way. And that involves that curiosity that we are talking about and helping people look inward at their own inner sources of judgment. So that, for me, that's what's most important.
Yeah, thank you, Ken. Eileen, any thoughts for you? And I'd love for you to tee up our session again tomorrow.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. And I just first want to just thank you with all my heart, both of you, Marquita and Ken. It's just been a fabulous time. I could sit here talking about this for hours. It's wonderful. I never tire of it. It's really been rich. And the conversation continues tomorrow. And I guess I want to just say to Tom, thank you for creating this platform so beautifully. Tomorrow, we have Kim Wright, who I think you both know. I know you do, Ken. And Kim is a leader in transforming the field of law. It's an international movement. She calls it integrative law. And it's a lot to do with how do you bring in forgiveness, love, transformation, and humanization into the law. And she has just been on that path. It's obviously, to me, her life's mission for decades. She spent many years traveling the world, connecting lawyers all over who also saw the problems, and more importantly, creating new ways of practicing and new systems and new values, a new set of values, and permission for lawyers to step into exactly what we're talking about today. Because that's the one thing we talked about, how do you bring it into the political arena? How do you bring it into personal relationships? But a whole huge arena that we all work in, all of us, and Ken, I know you have extensively, is the legal world, which has its own set of rubrics that don't necessarily support any of what we're talking about and actually discourage it in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
And, right?
absolutely.
So that is tomorrow. I'm looking forward to that as well.
And also just a thank you to Tom. This is a really wonderful conversation. Thank you for helping us walk our way through that.
It's been a pleasure to be in conversation with the three of you today. Such important work that you all are doing, and I continue to believe that if we as a species can move from adolescence to adulthood, we're going to be okay. And what you're doing is helping enable that transition and transformation of our species to happen. So beautiful work.
Actually,
just thank you all.
Bringing that back, I can't help to say this, but it goes back to Ken's initial point that if we are growing up, so to say, from being children, many of us wounded children at that, to adolescence or whatever, and maybe even adulthood, but these are growing pains. And as you said earlier, that's where conflict resides, is in the transition. So I think that's a beautiful dot to connect that would almost be expected and implicit. It's a good to contextualize it. Yeah.
Yeah, this has been a beautiful conversation. Marquita, thank you so much for your insights and ideas. This has really been a pleasure for me. Thank you all.
Same here. Thank you very much for having me as part of this conversation. Yeah. It's been great.
There is an after chat. I think everybody knows about that. It's available for people in the Zoom for people who want to take this into discussion. I've been attending it this week, and it has been really rich and beautiful. So anybody who's able to join that, I encourage you to do it. And I understand if you have to go and you can't, that's fine too. No pressure. It's an invitation.
Well, thank you all, and to our audience, we look forward to continuing our discussion tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.